let's go share my screen here. Give me a second. Okay, someone want to confirm to me either verbally in the chat as to whether or not you can see my screen.
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, great. So we'll just get right into it. Just to get it right out of the way then, I'll go over some of the more standard things you've probably heard of before in some amount as to why debate's beneficial to you. After this though, I'm going to talk a bit more person to person perhaps about how debate has affected me just as another person that you could talk to as a human, because I think you've heard a lot of these things before. So maybe it's from your debate club, maybe it's from your teachers, maybe it's from your parents. There's some very standard benefits that debate brings you. So for one, it's a really great way to develop your public speaking skills. And for innumerable reasons, being able to speak in front of a lot of people confidently, loudly, and with clarity is really important because oftentimes you're going to end up in positions, whether you like it or not, whether you opt into it consentingly or not, a time in which you have to speak in front of others. So maybe at some point in your high school career, you're going to lead a fundraiser. Maybe you're going to lead a club. Being able to public speak just opens up a lot of opportunities for you, both in terms of leadership. It has a lot of transferable skills. And debate's a great way to develop that because obviously you're consistently standing up in front of others and talking about your opinions, or maybe opinions that you don't necessarily defend. The second thing to say is that there's a lot of critical thinking that comes with debating. And I think the important thing to say here is you hear the phrase critical thinking a lot associated with debate. You have to critical think in order to win rounds. That's very vague. And I don't think a lot of people actually know what it means to develop critical thinking skills. I think most prominently and most importantly in debate, what comes of critical thinking is your ability to see the world in a more global perspective. So obviously, you are assigned sides in debate. There are two teams, varying numbers of speakers, varying formats, but always you're going to end up defending positions that you don't necessarily believe in. Maybe you're defending positions that you don't know anything about at all. And consistently doing that time after time again, having to criticize sometimes opinions that you believe in, if you're debating against a position that you hold beliefs with, you're going to have to learn to adopt those opinions on your own. Oftentimes, it legitimately changes your mind to do debate. A common criticism of debate is that you're just meaninglessly talking about issues with no relevance to the real world. But that's really not true because often you debate about important things and often you really do change your mind, even if rounds only span the time of an hour. The last thing I'll mention here is just there's a lot of academic opportunities that are associated with debate. It's a very academic activity. And there's a lot of prestige that comes with being able to say, I spoke second at a debate tournament, or I made it to the semi-finals of a debate tournament. And what's great about debate, and something that people from the outside don't really know about, is that there is just so many debate tournaments out there, especially with the creation of online debate tournaments where you can debate through Discord, where you can debate through Zoom. There's so many opportunities, and often it's not actually very hard to make it to a quarterfinal or to speak in the top 10, but it still looks very good because people from the outside don't know that. So there's a lot of academic opportunity to be gained in debate. But let's talk a bit more about, as a human-to-human conversation, what debate can bring you. Because I'm sure you know a lot of that already, and maybe you don't have a lot of choice as to whether or not you do debate. So these are some things that you can think about while you're doing debate that can guide you through that experience and make it as valuable for you as possible. So I'll talk about this through the lens of my own experiences, because I think that's how it's most easily understood from me to you. The first thing I want to talk a little bit about is discovering your interests. And I want to preface this by saying it's really important to be able to understand what your passions are and to understand what your interests are, right? Importantly, as you move on into life. And maybe that's intuitive. Maybe that's not very obvious as to why that's true. But even if it's just something like college apps, you oftentimes have to know what you want to major in. Having passions and interests that you actually really care about means that you learn about those things. And when you learn really deeply and a lot about a particular topic, you learn so much about it that it transfers to other areas of knowledge in your life. It's actually very useful, and not something that's just an activity for nerds. So it's really important to know what you're passionate about. For example, hosting this seminar is the magazine Youth Voices in Criminal Justice, which specializes in creating op-eds, opinion pieces, writing of high schoolers and youth in general that focuses on the topic of criminal justice. It collects people's opinions. It allows them to share them online. And I created that because I genuinely really like issues of that archetype. I like to talk about criminal justice. I like to talk about what's the legitimate and just way to punish people. What's the most effective way to set up prisons to help broader society? And the reason as to why that's connected to debate is because debate is a really, really diverse activity. You don't actually get to choose what topics you want to debate, if you might have had that preconception before. Topics are often given to you. They're often given to you with not a lot of time to prepare them. And so it forces you, if you want to be good at debate, to not only learn about a wide range of issues, but debate guides you through what kinds of issues you can learn about. Because I think the difficulty for a lot of people isn't really that you don't want to learn. I think a lot of people in this call probably are willing to sit in front of a YouTube video or read a short book about something that is akin to their interests. But the problem comes in the fact that there are so many things out there to learn that's sometimes difficult to know what to learn first, what might be the most important things to learn, what to learn that's actually going to pique your interests. And the reason why debate is good at helping you discover that is because the people, there are often teams of people who set the topics that you debate at tournaments or debate at practices, spend a lot of time carefully selecting topics that are fair, that are relevant to the world around you, and that are actually reasonably likely to be useful in other parts of your life. So what I like to call this are motion archetypes, and you'll hear a little bit more about this in the questions that we ask our juniors later. But you can categorize debate motions into a variety of interest areas. There's debates about economics. There's also debates about ethics. There's debates about scientific development. There's debates about immigration policy. And the fact that there's so many different things that you can debate about allows you to naturally, while doing something that's academic and reasonably enjoyable, I'd hope, you can learn about a lot of different things in the process. And that's how you can discover your interests, which is pretty important. The second aspect that I think is really great in debate is the aspect of community. And I want to explain as to why debate in particular, opposed to any other extracurricular, is really great for community, because I'm sure that there are some amounts of community that exist in the math club or whatever other extracurriculars you're involved in. And I think the main reason is that the community in debate is really unique because it's really international. Maybe there are math teams out there in other countries, in the US or whatnot. But the thing with debate is that you can connect with people online in a way that is almost just as meaningful if you were to debate with them at in-person tournaments. So during COVID-19, obviously, debate had to move online, and people debated through online platforms. And notably, people from all around the world did so, because you don't really need to meet in person to have a valuable discussion of words, which is why you were able to meet so many different people through debating. Like even in local Canadian tournaments, people from around the world come to Canada. And it's particularly good that you're Canadian because Canada is very renowned for having a very prestigious and good debate community. So people from all around the world really like to come to Canadian tournaments to compete because Canadians are very good at debating. So for example, last year there was an online tournament at McGill, which is a university in Ontario. So people from all across Canada, first of all, competed. I was able to compete. People from BC competed, but there were also people all the way from around the world in like the Philippines who came to compete at a tournament hosted in McGill. And there's just so many opportunities, specifically because we're Canadians and because debate is such an online and interconnected activity, that you're able to get really valuable experiences in the communities that you interact with. And the reason as to why it's really great that you're able to interact with people around the world is because, and I think you'll know this if you've had the chance to interact with other people from other places, is that it's a really valuable experience, and it's really cool to hear about other people's cultures and hear about other people's worldviews, which is something that happens naturally in debating because Filipino debaters will use examples from the Philippines in their speeches. You learn about what Filipino governments are like. You learn about what Filipino social cultures are like, and you see that in the debate speeches. But also you make friends with these people, right? And you just talk about them. So I've had the privilege to make a lot of friends, particularly closely in Mexico and in Singapore. And it's just really great because they talk a lot about their cultures, not necessarily in ways that are related to debate. Like these are just friends that you make and you learn more about the world, which is valuable in itself in the process. And that's something that's really hard to find elsewhere. So it's something that makes debate really great in that aspect. So I'd encourage you while you're debating to not just confine yourself to Albertan debate, which is often what your school programs are going to offer you, but to go to tournaments that are online, that connect people from all around the world. And even if you're relatively new to debating, they're very open to you. People of all levels debate at online tournaments. That's why they're so accessible. So I'd encourage you to reach out to me, reach out to Jade about what those tournaments are. There's so many out there. We can direct you if you need assistance. The third thing I want to talk a bit about then is what I'd like to call an alumni network inside of debate. And basically what I mean by this is that for reasons I can't exactly explain, I find that debaters are very involved with debating even oftentimes after they graduate. So I have a lot of friends who graduated last year, whether it be on Team Canada, whether it just be people that I've met through debate, who are all across the world by now. Some of them are in the UK attending Oxford, whatnot. And they stay very committed to debate, and they stay very committed to the communities that brought them up in debating in the first place. Oftentimes they debate on their own. There's university circuits where debaters from all different universities around the world come together and debate just like we do in middle school and high school. So the reason as to why that's really cool is three things. The first is, as I just mentioned, there's so much community building and outreach that you can find in debate. There's so many people that you're able to get acquainted with. And the reason as to why that's really valuable, especially when they've graduated already, is because like it gives you networking opportunities, right? It gives you insight into people who are already studying at university and that you're good friends with. I think a lot of people are told the advice. You have to network. You have to make a LinkedIn account and message a bunch of people in order to know things about universities you want to attend. You have to ask those people questions. But that's very hard, right? Often you don't know people who are at universities. Often it's very weird to randomly message somebody in their DMs and to ask for help about uni. And debate gives you an excuse to do that because often you know these people. You don't have to make a random LinkedIn account and message people you don't know. That's very valuable. The second thing, though, is that once again, you learn from these people. The forms of learning that they get at university, the university debaters that they debate with, gives them a lot of knowledge that you don't have access to as a high schooler. And the fact that they're so involved with debate, even after they graduate, means that you can learn from the same materials and the same people that they learned from, which is also really valuable because it gives you information that you can use in all different places of your life, however you want to. The last point here isn't exactly related to people who graduate and go off to uni, but there's just such a huge amount of online material that allows you to learn debate fully on your own. I think particularly for many of you who might be forced into debate by your parents. Maybe you don't actually really want to be a part of this activity. A way to make that a little bit better is that you can take control of how you want to improve and learn in debate because of the huge amount of resources that exist online. So, for example, the World Schools Debating Championships, which is the highest level of debating in high school, brings national teams from all around the world to debate. So I debate for Canada. And rounds of those WSDC tournaments exist in like limitless amounts on YouTube. Like each round is up to an hour long with 6 different people who are debating. So you get a wide range of viewpoints and a huge breadth of knowledge. And there's like, I couldn't even tell you how many rounds of that on YouTube. So not only is there a lot of resources, you can choose the rounds that are the most interesting to you. Because I mentioned before, there's such a wide array of different topics that debate covers. So you can guide yourself in how you want to improve in debate, what you want to improve at in debate. Maybe you want to learn more about economics. Maybe you want to learn more about ethics. I think this is really great because it always feels like you have an opportunity to improve and to improve in ways that you want to. This is just a small thing, but I think, and I'm speaking from a position of assumption because I'm not very involved in other extracurriculars like math, which I'm sure many of you are very familiar with. There's an exhilaration to debate that I think, at the very least, is the most noticeable and prevalent inside of debating. So what I want to say here is that Canada is known for having a very weak national culture. And as somebody who's not very invested in things like sports, I've never really felt what people will call national pride or nationalism in their country until last summer, where I was able to watch Team Canada in person and travel alongside them in Vietnam, debate all the way up to the finals. And I think the reason why that's true is because debate is really exhilarating. Like there's a lot of intensity to debate and intensity between different people. So it's a really exhilarating activity that gives you energy. It's fun to be a part of. So throughout the round, you get mad at people. And that doesn't sound great, but it adds to the activity in the end because like it energizes you. It's an exhilarating activity to be a part of. Waiting for deliberation, there's a lot of stress that comes with that, which once again doesn't sound intuitively great, but it adds to the experience. And I think a part of that is that it makes you a lot more emotionally mature because you have to learn to, for example, not make faces during other people's speeches. You have to learn to not be upset when opponents insult your ideas and bring down your arguments. And that sounds like a small thing, but it's actually pretty important throughout life. I think that's something very valuable which you learn in debate. Just one more note here. Maybe this isn't the most relevant to you. I think it's kind of nice. I mentioned before that a lot of people don't know the complexities of what debate is really like unless you're a part of debate. But just a reminder to everyone, please mute yourselves in case you are not muted right now. Yeah, thanks. Anyways, the fact that people don't know a lot about what debate is really like means that people have this weird idea that debaters are really smart for some reason, that debaters are really, really academic people. And it's just a nice reputation to have, even if it's not really true for a lot of people. It's good things that come from debate. This is the last thing. There's just some extraneous secondary benefits which debate brings you. Some of which probably weren't very obvious. The first is that debate teaches you to write really fast and to write a lot. So your hands don't really get tired when you're doing 3 rounds a day that are hours long, and you're writing a lot during that time. And the reason as to why I've actually found that useful is because I imagine many of you may already be into the future are probably going to be enrolled in like AP courses, for example. And essays in AP courses are things that you have to write 3 or 4 of in the span of like 2 hours. And it just really helps to be able to write really efficiently and without having your hand hurt a lot. The second thing I'll say is, and I think debaters like to call this being very skilled at BSing. Debating is just really great for interviews because you learn a lot of vocabulary in debating, and it's vocabulary that isn't really valuable for any other purpose of sounding extremely smart, which is really helpful in interviews because it makes you come off as very educated. It makes you come off as eloquent. And that's something that's not a skill you develop in a lot of other places naturally other than debate. The last thing then, it encourages you to learn a lot about the world. I think a phenomena that I've encountered with a lot of people is that when you enter high school, maybe right now you have a big passion for reading. You read every day. You really like to do those. You really like to do those types of things. But as school becomes progressively busier, it's really hard to continue pursuing those passions. And I think what debate gives you is an excuse to continue reading, because it's for an academic goal in the end. Even fiction books, it's not necessarily nonfiction things you have to read. Of course, that's probably an important aspect of it, and it's a reason to read nonfiction, which many others don't have a reason for. But reading things like fiction books are an important part of developing rhetoric, being able to speak eloquently and speak with style. And so if you enjoy reading, debate's a reason for as to why you're able to continue pursuing those interests and those passions well into high school, for example. So like I mentioned earlier, if you want any recommendations as to what books are particularly valuable to developing skill and knowledge inside of debate, feel free to reach out to either Jade and I afterwards. We can help you with that. If you have any questions, save that to the end. I'll be sure to answer those. And as I noted in the flyer for the event, I've written a book that details these experiences in a lot more depth and a lot more detail. And you could probably get a lot out of it. So if you want access to that, it's going to be sent to all emails that have submitted the Google form afterwards. But yeah, I hope that's changed at least some of your minds about what debating is like and the possibility that it can be a valuable experience to you. So what we're going to do now is, as Jade mentioned earlier, we have 4 junior debaters. So Zachary, Bill, Jasmine, and Sarah, I believe. Stay muted, but you can give them a bit of virtual applause. So the 4 of you that I just mentioned, Hannah, Jasmine, Bill, and Sarah, turn on your cameras, and we're going to ask you a series of questions about what their experiences in debate have been like. And you've heard a lot from me. You can get some testimonies from people who may be closer to your age, who maybe have some different experiences from me as to what their experiences in debate have been like. So the way this is going to work is I have a list of questions here, and I'm just going to throw these questions out. And of the 4 of you, any of you can jump in and answer a question if you think you have a good answer to it. And yeah, you can get some insight into what their debate experiences have been like. So the first question, what is a debate topic that you might want to debate in the future, and why is that the case? Anyone can feel free to step in. If you don't, go in the order that I listed your names.
Okay, I guess I'll go. I guess like AI related topics, because it's more of like a recent topic, and like there's still a lot of info going around about it, and I also know like more about it, and also I guess it leans more towards my interests, which is also why I want to do it. So yeah.
What's an argument you might make about AI in debate? What's a motion you might want to debate about? Has it been able to expand your interest in AI in any way in the past?
Yeah, probably like how could like help in schools, like for example, like a lot of people, like a lot of schools like associated with like cheating, but like in general it could also like help schools and like students' education in general.
Anyone else?
Okay, hi. Okay, turn off your volume. I apologize for that.
Nice.
So I've already done this topic, but I'd like to do it again. It's about like how like this house prefers like rehabilitation over like retribution. And an argument, I guess, for like retribution would just be like that it's a form of deterrence, so it keeps people like away from jail in the first place.
Yeah. Do you want to do a little bit of explaining as to maybe what retribution and rehabilitation are to the people who might not know about those things, and maybe something you've learned in debating about those concepts that have expanded your interests?
Yeah, okay. So retribution is essentially jail. Rehabilitation is where like it's like jail but better, so they bring you to jail and they try to help you via like therapy and stuff, and like try to reintegrate you back into society. So usually this is like very like soft measures compared to like jail. And is the second question just like my interest?
Yeah, has it expanded or connected to your interests in any ways?
Yeah, okay. I'm pretty big on like criminal law and like criminal justice. So that motion just is like pretty intriguing to me, and I find it very interesting to debate.
Cool. Sarah and Zachary, do you have anything to say?
Yeah, sure. Okay. I would actually want to debate a topic about how like every teacher that goes to like teaches in school has to be educated on what they teach, because I just had two teachers say to me that they weren't taught these kind of things, so as they were teaching us, they were also learning with us. So like I don't really like that because technically you're not teaching me right in my mind. So, I would like it if teachers, started to actually be educated. And although this probably won't come true, I would love to debate about it.
Yeah. So a lot of debate topics aren't necessarily grounded in reality. Sometimes they're policies that would only happen in a real world, but they still give us valuable knowledge into what moving towards those kinds of worlds might look like. Okay, let's move on to the next question. What's a challenge you've been presented with in debate? And how did you overcome it? What did you learn from that experience?
Okay, I'll go again. So definitely like not knowing topics. Like often there'll be like a topic given to me and I'll have no idea like about it. So like how I usually solve it is I just end up like researching about it and like reading more books, just being like I guess more like knowledgeable. And so hopefully that doesn't like it's still gonna happen, but like hopefully not as much.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty universal experience. I think it's worth saying that even when you know absolutely nothing about a topic, what debate forces you to do, debate forces you to do a lot of things, if you noticed by now, is use logic, use some common sense, and feel your way through how debating that round might look like. And so when you go on later to research about that topic, you have a structure, right? You can see whether or not your intuition and your common sense led you to the right arguments. You know what to look for, which is often really hard, just like I talked about earlier. And debate's really helpful in that aspect. It forces you to think constructively. And that's a part of critical thinking too. Bill or Sarah?
I guess I can go. Probably just like in general, like prepping your debate and like knowing what to say, because like you can't predict what the other side's gonna say, so you kind of have to like guess what they're gonna say and then like respond to that, like if that's like a really important part of your speech. And also just in general, like also like POIs, because basically like so it's basically when someone on the opposite team like raised a question for you to answer to like try to poke a hole in your speech. Sometimes it's difficult to come up with a response to that quickly, and sometimes you have to stall and like think about it. And so that's also like a hard part.
So how have you approached those challenges? Have you made any progress on responding to POIs on the spot, for example?
Responding to POIs, you can kind of, like I said before, you can kind of stall to like you could like ask like could you repeat this POI, or like could you clarify? I don't know if that second one works, but also in general, you can just kind of like say like, for example, like even if you aren't going to, you can just say like, I'm going to talk about this in my speech later, or you can say I've already talked about this, and so like that works. But those are like kind of just strategies if like you genuinely can't come up with a response.
Yeah, so for those who might not be familiar, a POI, which stands for a point of information, is essentially when somebody on the opposite team of the debate stands up in the middle of your speech, and if you let them, they'll ask you a question, and that question is designed to respond to something that you've said, to poke a hole in your speech, as Bill mentioned. And so the various ways in which you try to respond to POIs that might be very difficult to answer, questions that you don't have an answer to on the spot. That's a part of what you do in interviews in life, right? Being able to critically think in those ways is pretty important. Before we move on to the next question, do you have anything on that topic, Sarah? Okay. Next question. Have you made any new friends in debating? Has debating enhanced any of your existing friendships? And what are some memorable moments that you've had with those friends in debating?
Okay, great. I'll go then. Because our school has a debate club, so a lot of people that I otherwise don't really talk with joined that debate club. So I was able to make a lot of friends like via school, and that's like really important to me. And I've also just like when I go to tournaments, I see people there, and I like when I debate against them, I get to talk to them, etc.
Yeah, for sure. Maybe some of the things that I talked about earlier about meeting people from around the world doesn't sound very plausible. Maybe it sounds kind of out of reach for some of you. There's just communities in debate that exist even locally, right? I think oftentimes you don't interact a lot with people from other schools, even from within the city. And debate's a way that you can introduce yourself to new people, new crowds, which can sound scary, but once you end up finding those friendships, it really is meaningful in that. Bill or Sarah, do you have anything to comment on that?
Yeah, similar to Jasmine, when I go to like these tournaments, if you like talk to like, you know, your competitors or like even just like the people around you, you know, that you're going to meet around, you can make a lot of like really good friends that way. And also like even just like make friends with like really importantly, make friends with like your partner and the judges. I'm just going to like say that as like a really important thing to do.
Yeah, that's true. So me and my partner, for example, Summit, might know, might not. I think friendships that you develop with your partners, especially when those are long-term partners that you do a lot of tournaments with, that sometimes you travel to other places around the world, other places in the country with, are some of the most meaningful friendships you can have. Because once again, debate gives you an excuse to do things like travel. Tournaments like nationals that quite a few people in the province go to every year, let you travel with friends to places like Montreal, I believe it was in, last year. And that's just a really valuable experience in itself. It also makes your friendships a lot stronger because, you know, traveling with people that you know, sometimes without your parents, is a really great experience. Bill, any last comments on that?
I guess also like in general, like talking to people, like usually where I go for debate, like you just get like partnered up with someone random, and even though like sometimes you might end up with like a person that you think is really bad. Like eventually you come to like be friends with some people because you get partner with them often and you think like they're good and so do they, like they think you're good. And so that can also like build friendships in general.
Yeah, that's a good point. So oftentimes you have to partner with people who may not be at your skill level. That sounds harsh, but it's not a thing to be ashamed of or anything bad. I think it's really valuable, for example, if you have years of experience in debate to be able to pass on knowledge and experiences that you've had onto somebody else. It's a really good feeling in itself. I think I saw Zachary raise his hand. If you have anything to say, go ahead. Not, it's okay. Next question.
Sorry, my Wi-Fi was cutting out. Is it okay if I still answer or?
Oh yeah, no worries. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think just to add from what everyone else said, you can make a ton of friends and like extend your social network a lot from just one tournament because you can make friends or like you can strengthen connections with your partners. You can get to know your opponents in rounds better. You can get to know your judges and like the tournament directors. So it's really important to just be aware of the amount of people that you can meet in a tournament or in any debate scenario.
Yeah, I think you raised a good point. So I talked a bit about the exhilaration of debate earlier. I think a part of that is that you get to actually talk to your opponents after the round, right? And that might sound kind of awkward to talk to the people who just insulted you and that you insulted back for a good hour. But I think that's a part of what makes talking to them so cool. Because you're debaters in the debate room who are enemies, I guess, or opponents. But as soon as you step out of that room, those are other people just like you. And debate gives you an excuse to talk a lot about things, talk about your own experiences in debate with people. And talking with opponents is really cool. Yeah. Next question. What is your favorite motion or favorite motion type? And why? What's an example of a round that you've done with that motion type or motion?
Okay, I guess I can go. I guess it's like this house like wood types of debates. So like in general, it's just like a classic motion type, and like there's not much to set up, and it's simple to understand for like beginners. And it's also like there's not as much to worry about in the debate, and it's also kind of like the motions that like you start off with for like almost like the first half of like your debate years, I guess.
What's specific in this house wood motion that you really enjoyed debating?
I guess well, this is my first one I've debated. Just this house would ban zoos, probably like the most classic one, but also like you'll see it like everywhere, and like there's a lot of points to both sides, and it's like even though like it occurs in a lot of places, like there's still a lot of like fresh like ideas that you can come up with apart from like the obvious ones.
Yeah. So brings up a good point. And as on to what I was talking about earlier, that there's a lot of diversity in the kind of debating that you can do. So this house wood motions, there can be this house wood motions about the environment, about science, about economics. And if you don't know what a this house wood motion is, you'll get some more clarity about that in a second. I think we can entertain maybe 2 more answers. So how about Sarah and Jasmine just close us off on this question? Whoever wants to answer first can go ahead.
I'll go first, I guess. Okay, so I really like this house supports or this house regrets motions because for these ones, it's really more of a mindset question, like what if kind of motion. So in these kind of cases, it's really easy to come up with things because in those kind of like motions, you don't need to think specifically, I guess, about like like deeper details of like, you know, things like cost and stuff like that. So it's really easy to make up like good points and not have to worry about really hard rebuttal. So that's really good.
Yeah. So that's the other spectrum of motions. Some of them are a lot more complex. Some of them require you to imagine a lot of things that might not have references and examples in the real world. Jasmine?
Similar to Sarah, I like This House Regrets, but like I also like This House Regrets the narrative motions, because like I find it quite challenging and like fun to do because there's like certain arguments that you can't run in those motions. So it's like it's a good mind challenge.
Yeah. So it's worth just talking about this a little bit now. This house regrets motion. So let's say we are regretting the narrative that forgiveness is a virtue. So let's just look at the parts of the motion. If you regret that forgiveness is a virtue, I think most of us can agree that we don't like that forgiveness is a virtue. But the layer of complexity here is that we're debating this as if there was some separate world where forgiveness was never a virtue. I think in most debates, it's kind of intuitive that we approach it like a policy. So from this moment in time forward, forgiveness would no longer be a virtue. But the reason as to why This House Regrets would encourage imagination, for example, is because you have to think about what a completely different world that never existed before, without forgiveness as a virtue, would look like. And those are the kinds of complexity that you can choose to or not want to choose to engage with at points in debate, depending on what you're interested in. That wraps up the panel interview session. So thank you to our juniors for your answers. Hopefully that gave you a little more insight about what the experiences in debating have been like for people who are not me. And I hope that it reflects a lot of the valuable experiences that I've had can also be experienced on lower levels by people who debate more casually, who debate at a local level. Okay, so as for the schedule, what we're going to go ahead and do now is, particularly for those who aren't the most familiar with debate, or maybe are very familiar with local forms of debate, Jade's going to talk a bit about what the major styles of debating look like, and what some of the opportunities that are available to you actually are once you decide to opt into those opportunities. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen here.
All right. Awesome. Okay, cool. I'll just say like change the slide and then you can change the slide. Okay, cool. So this is just a general introduction to debate. Obviously debate takes a very long time to learn. I'm not even gonna lie. Sometimes I have trouble remembering a bunch of the stuff too. So this is just going to be a very broad overview about what debate looks like. Next slide. So there's a couple of things I want to talk about. So British Parliamentary, Canadian National Debating Format, and World Schools are three of the main styles that we do here in Canada. And then lastly, I want to wrap it up with a little bit about Alberta Debate and Speech Association and some of the things that they organize for us. Next slide. Cool, debating formats. There's many different types of debate, and I'm going to talk a little bit about them. But firstly, what is debating, right? I think this is a broad question that everybody's probably here to know about. So it is a formal disagreement between two sides about a motion. With British Parliamentary, it's a little quirky, but I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. But I think generally it's just a disagreement about a motion. And there's two sides, one supporting the motion and one that does not support the motion. So there's many different types of motions. So like Barry specified, like this house would or we would is a policy motion in which you actually have to do something in the world and you have to explain what that thing is that you're doing. So let's say the topic is this house would ban smoking, or in other words, we would ban smoking. One of the things that you need to outline before you even talk about your arguments is what would banning smoking really look like, right? What is smoking? Is it the smoking of meat? Is it nicotine? Is it e-cigarettes? What is it? And this is very, very important for the rest of the debate to operate smoothly. There's another kind of motion known as like a values motion, and you don't have to do anything in this motion. You're just talking about it. So you don't have to tell them. So in a motion in which it says, this house believes that smoking should be banned, you don't really have to talk about how you're going to ban smoking. So over the course of 3 years, are you shutting down companies, things like that? You just argue whether or not smoking in a society should be allowed or not. So I think that's the main difference between these two types of motions. Like Barry talked about, it helps develop critical thinking skills and broaden our knowledge of the world, specifically within the context of current events. So with debating, you need to collect lots and lots of knowledge about the world around you. I'm sure everybody here probably at least reads the news once a month, but with debating, it requires you to have a constant knowledge of what's going on around you, so you can apply them into debate rounds. And then the last bullet point here, I think, is probably the most interesting. So there are various different formats of debating. And so what that essentially means is so in the US, they have, I think, almost 15 different styles of debating. And all these different types of debating have different rules, different amount of people on the team. They talk about different types of motions. Obviously, that makes it really, really convoluted. But one of the things that Canadian debate prioritizes, or parliamentary debate prioritizes, is being able to convince the everyday person. So when you're talking to somebody else and you want them to believe, I don't know, that the earth is flat or that the earth is round, this is the kind of things that we want to talk about. In the US, it's more about convincing a person that is already incredibly familiar with debate. So you can use a bunch of crazy words that nobody else has heard about, use a bunch of crazy theories that nobody else has heard about, and you can still win rounds that way. So I think that's the main difference between these two styles of debating. Obviously, in Canada, we do the former. Okay, next slide. So, okay. Within any given debate round, there are speeches, right? So periods of time in which you can talk about the motion or talk against the motion. And so in British Parliamentary, there's actually 4 groups of teams in one round. There's still 2 sides, as you can see through this diagram, but what you're essentially trying to do on the bottom half, so number 5 and number 7, or number 6 and number 8, is to outdo your opening half, to have better, newer, more creative, more impactful ideas. If you can't do that, you lose the round to your opening half, which is what it says here. So opening government, opening opposition. And within this round, I think specifically in British Parliamentary, it's a lot more about strategy than it is about giving very, very detailed arguments. Because in British Parliamentary, you only have 5 minutes to talk, which is not a lot. 5 minutes is barely enough to give 2 arguments and maybe a couple lines of refutation why the other side is wrong. So I think the style currently is quite popular in Canadian debate, not only because there's a lot of tournaments about it, but also because it is a style that is commonly debated in university. So if you guys like debate in high school and you want to continue it, this is a style you will be predominantly doing, not Canadian National, not World Schools. Those things tend to only exist in high school debate. Yeah. Okay, cool. Next slide. So this is another kind of debating. So this kind of debating popped up in Canada, which is why it's called Canadian National Debating Format, which also means, unfortunately, it's not debated anywhere else other than Canada. So there's only a national level competition. So some people think this style is easier than BP because it's just the front portion of BP. But unfortunately, there's no international competition that you can attend, unlike with BP. It's pretty much the same thing. The speeches are a little bit longer. The times on here are for seniors, so basically Barry and I's age category. But for you guys, your speeches are at most going to be 6 minutes long and 5 minutes if you're just starting out debate, which I guess is the majority of this class. Yeah, I don't think there's anything super special about this. I think the only difference is that in the second speech, so if you're speaking first, your partner's speech, your partner has to provide a brand new reason why the motion should go through or should not go through, versus in the opening half of BP. Can you go back to the slide before that? versus in the opening half of BP, where if you're number 3 or number 4, you don't necessarily need to provide a new piece of argumentation because you only have 5 minutes, right? There's not that much time. In Canadian National, you have a little bit more, so you're expected to do a little bit more. Okay, all right, on to the World School slide. Okay, so on to World School. So World Schools operates a little bit differently than the other types of debating, mainly because speeches are 8 minutes long, irrespective of how old you are. You could be in 7th grade or in 12th. They're all going to be 8 minutes long. And uniquely, they have a third speech. So in the other two styles, you notice there's only 2 people on one team. 2 people speaking within any given round. For World Schools, there's 3. And the third prop and the third op basically give a rebuttal speech. So they say why everything in the round has gone their way, and they explain it typically in some themes, and they have to explain it in themes, essentially. There's no alternative, versus in the other 2 styles, you can kind of play around. You can give line by line, that doesn't really matter. And themes are just broad understandings of what the round is about. So within a motion about banning smoking, you probably have one theme about why people should be able to do anything that they want to, and maybe another theme about whether or not smoking is good or bad for you. So things like that. And obviously they're the reply speeches. Reply speeches are just a biased summary of the round. So why a judge should vote for you. They're really, really hard because you only have 4 minutes to convince a judge why you should win. Okay, next slide, because I'm running out of time. Okay, ADSA. So ADSA is the Alberta Speech and Debate Association. So this is the debate association that all of your debate clubs are going to be about. So as long as they're a debating club, chances are they're under the ADSA. And what your $20 of ADSA registration fee gives you is the opportunity to attend debate and speech tournaments for all of Alberta. So not only is this like the one-off tournament at perhaps Weber or at Reynolds School, but other tournaments that are qualifying competitions. So last year, through regionals, provincials, I was able to advance to provincials, in which that provincial competition was in Calgary as well. If you're not part of the ADSA, highly encourage your school to register. It's fantastic for giving you a bunch of opportunities and making you eligible for tournaments such as like ICYD, so internationals for juniors, or Oxford, which is internationals for seniors. Some of the upcoming tournaments are Renner BP, my old school. They're hosting it 2nd week of October. That same weekend, there's also BP qualifiers, which is just you replace the word qualifier with provincials. It's British Parliamentary provincials, and that's in Edmonton. So unfortunately, if you do want to attend that, chances are you probably will have to drive. And then for another junior tournament, there's a Bob Edwards debate tournament, I believe also within the same week. So if you really, really like debating, that's another opportunity for you. I heard it's well organized, has pretty good food. Yeah, so generally sign up for debate. I think it's fantastic. It's provided me all of these amazing benefits. Okay, cool. So that concludes my PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah, great. So hopefully that gives you a little bit more insight into what we're talking about when we're doing competitive debate. Maybe some styles that you didn't know about if you're a little bit more familiar with local levels of debate. So what we're going to do now is a bit of what I'd like to call a thinking exercise. So this is to be completed outside of the time of this session. And we'll also look at what everyone comes up with outside the time of this session. And there's a PowerPoint for this, so I'm just going to go ahead and show my screen for that as well. Okay, so I think the best way to explain how this works is to generally define what it is that we're looking for everyone here to write. So what we're looking from everyone is what's called an opinion piece. And essentially what an opinion piece is that it is a form of journalism or writing where an author expresses their personal views, their beliefs, or their arguments on a particular subject. So that sounds very general, and it's because it is very general. You have a lot of flexibility in writing about your opinions. So unlike news articles, for example, which typically give you information about what's happening around the world in a non-biased way, opinion pieces are subjective, and they aim to persuade the reader to consider the author's viewpoint. So pretty much every major news outlet out there is going to have a dedicated section of their news that posts opinion pieces. So we're going to give everyone these slides afterwards, and you can just go ahead and check about some of the ones that we think are the best at creating opinion pieces. If you want some guidance and some examples as to what opinion pieces look like and how they've been done in the past. If you want to think about this in another way, you can just think about them as debate speeches in the form of an article. And if you make a few small adjustments to your language and to some transition words that you use in debate, you're really just doing the same thing. You're giving a debate speech in the form of writing. And that's why it's valuable practice that can translate into the kinds of benefits that we talked about in debating. So I just explained as to why it's really flexible, and you can really go in this in any way that you want to. But if you want some very specific guidelines as to how to write an opinion piece, the first and most basic way, you can probably just follow the format of an essay that you learn in school. So you have a thesis statement, some kind of introduction which precedes that thesis, and then use that thesis to set up two arguments, which then you go on to elaborate on, probably in two separate paragraphs, and you have some kind of conclusion. What's nice about opinion pieces is you can also just elaborate on one argument that you're really passionate or know a lot about, or if you're just too lazy to think of two arguments. As long as you're very clearly expressing some kind of arguable, contentious opinion inside of your article, then that meets the standards of what an opinion piece is supposed to do. So, as I mentioned earlier, the workshop here is offered by Youth Voices in Criminal Justice. And so, as I also mentioned, it's an online magazine that connects people from all across Canada, in some parts of the US, to write about criminal justice and anything that's loosely or remotely connected to it. So some people choose to write about financial law and the ways in which corporations are regulated. Some people choose to write about war criminals and whether or not we should try them in particular ways. So even if everything should be roughly connected to law or criminal justice in some way, you have a lot of flexibility to choose what you want to write about. If you don't want to make decisions, then there's also a list of prompts that the organization has available, and you can personally request for those after this seminar if you'd like. So what the homework assignment here is then, is that we want everyone to have the chance to write an opinion piece for the first time, or maybe for the 10th time for submission. There isn't a strict word length, there isn't a strict format, there's a lot of flexibility that you have with this. Approximately 500 words is a good length, I think is a average for a lot of the pieces on the website. So it shouldn't take you over an hour at max, probably, to put together something like this. And so for this specific assignment, we're going to give you a prompt to write about. And it's a semi-advanced motion that people might not know the most about. So Jade and I are going to help you prepare some basic ideas for ways to approach your opinion piece. And then afterwards, we'll take questions, not just about this, but at anything at any point during the seminar that you might want to ask about. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce the topic to write about, some ideas for if you want to support the topic, and then I'll turn it over to Jade to talk about the other side of the issue. So the topic is this. This house would integrate a course about criminal law into middle school. And if you don't know what this means, you can just read it as whether or not we should integrate a course about criminal law into middle school. And let's talk a little bit about what you should probably introduce in your preface, or a introduction into what criminal law in middle school would look like as a way to get an idea of what you're writing about. So like any other thing that you learn in school, whether it be math, whether it be chemistry, it's probably going to be the government, for example, probably the local government, that is going to build a curriculum around criminal law. And criminal law, obviously, is a very expansive and a very multivariate topic, which can cover a variety of different things. So you can write about what you imagine this criminal law curriculum to look like. But it is a curriculum that's going to be taught in mostly the same ways across classrooms in Canada, in Alberta, wherever you want your article to take place. And I think the first and most obvious thing to talk about is how this benefits children in their education, right? And there's just a lot of ways you can approach this. You can expand upon some of these ideas. You can organize them into a bigger idea. There's just some food for thought. So the first thing to talk a little bit about is it gives children insight into potential future careers. So most classes right now and most careers have careers and classes that are connected with them. So math teaches people things about going into engineering. Science often gives you the foundations for being a chemical scientist or whatever job it is that happens to connect to those subjects. And working in law is obviously a very big industry as well. So it's probably quite important for people who are interested in these things to have some kind of pre-professional exposure to these kinds of knowledge in middle school, right early, so they know whether or not they want to do these things. The second is that it allows these people to have a better understanding of their rights and freedoms, right? And that's probably quite important because even if right now, as children, we might not immediately understand when in life we have to make use or understand our rights and freedoms, these are things that become obviously very important as children grow up, as children often have to engage in litigation of some kind into the future that affects their lives. So it's important to understand the way in which that deals with your personal interests early on, and not later when it's maybe too late. The third thing to talk about is it lowers the possibility of juvenile offenses. I'm sure nobody here is very familiar personally with juvenile offense, but many people aren't in the most fortunate of circumstances. Many people don't have the best of upbringing. Some people are surrounded by very poor and crime-riddled communities. And what that means is to have a good understanding of what you'll be punished for if you do choose to commit crimes, you do choose to engage in juvenile offenses, is a good way to prevent people from making bad decisions if they might not be able to teach themselves that through their parents or through their circumstances. The last idea to just think a little bit about is this broadens their understanding of the world around them. I think law is, of most other subjects, probably something that is the most applicable to the world that is directly around you. I think a lot of people joke about how something like calculus is not very applicable to daily life, but knowing your rights if you happen to be stopped by a police officer, knowing what legal protections you have access to if you're being abused by your employer, are things that are very important for ordinary people to know about. And that's what a course on criminal law would be, allow people to be educated in. I'll pass it over to Jade to talk a bit about the other side.
Yeah. Okay, one second. My computer's being a bit weird. Okay, cool. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about the opposition side. Personally, I'm a little bit biased. I'm more of a fan of the opposition side. But there's two main things under the opposition. So first is that this is an inefficient allocation of time. So criminal law is very, very niche, right? You probably haven't really heard of it unless you're like particularly passionate about. And so one of the things that you can talk about is how there's many other classes that tend to be more important. So in your math or English or science class, you can explore a variety of future careers. So if you're taking science, there's like different things, right? Like biochemistry, being a doctor, being an engineer, versus in criminal law, where I guess the alternative is just going into criminal law itself. And essentially, the argument is that it takes way too much time within a day, and it's taking time out of effective classes that meaningfully improve the lives of young children. But second of all, it could be potentially traumatizing for younger children, specifically those in like the younger end of the middle school spectrum. So the motives of criminals and the reasons why criminals commit crimes are oftentimes quite devastating, and oftentimes younger children just can't understand. So for instance, being forced to commit like drive-by shootings in order to make money, or like robbing a bunch of stores because you don't have enough food for that day. Those are all very, very common reasons why people choose to commit very, very terrible crimes. And unfortunately, lots of children are unable to comprehend the full scope of the terrible things this causes. And at the end of the day, it's very unclear whether or not we want to expose these heinous motives to children at such a young age, especially if that's not something that they're particularly interested in, right? So this course is likely going to be mandatory. So irrespective of whether or not you like criminal law or you want to talk about criminal law, it's something that you have to learn about. And it's very unclear at the end of the day whether or not this is worth the potential traumatizing of children at a very, very young age.
Yeah, so those are just some ideas to think about from both sides as to whether or not it might be a good idea to teach people about criminal law in middle school. And so there's a few important things to note here. The first thing is we have a lot of your emails through the Google form. If you wanted to give us your email and forgot to do so, you can still do that. But for those of you who haven't, just make sure to take note of what the topic here is. So I'm just going to leave the Google slide up here for a little bit of time. You can write down the topic to be written about. If you'd like me to go back to a previous slide, maybe the proposition slide, if you want to look at those ideas, totally speak up and ask me to do so. While you're doing that, there's a few other things to type down and make note of if we currently don't have your email through the Google form to be able to give you afterwards. So the first is the email that you should use for submission after you finish writing your opinion piece. So this is not just a homework piece to be a homework piece. Articles that you think, sorry for that. Articles that you do think, or we think, are of high quality, that do express valuable opinions. We're going to review these and post those onto the Youth Voices in Criminal Justice website. So gives you an incentive, I guess, to actually try to maybe do a little bit of research, to think a little bit more about the quality of what you're writing about. And you might just end up published in the pieces section of the magazine. The final thing to write down then, oh yeah, so for the submission email, and just say in the chat or say out loud if you would like me to repeat it, is this. Actually, I'll just type it in the chat so everyone has access to it and there's no need to misspell anything. So that's the email for submitting homework pieces to afterwards. After you have completed your homework assignment in writing this opinion piece. The very last thing from me then is if you have any questions about any of the other things in this presentation, about tournaments that you want to get more insight into, books, videos of debates that you might think are particularly interesting, and maybe come up with these questions after this session, feel free to direct those to Jade or I. And I'm going to put my email here, and I'll forward all the questions to Jade too. So just in case she has something to add on, or if you want to specify that you want an answer from her, I'll get that for you too. So make note of those two emails. And if anyone has any questions about the assignment now, or anything else in the presentation, feel free to speak up. Yeah, so somebody had a question in the chat about whether or not the opinion piece was optional. So the opinion piece is really strongly encouraged, especially because we aren't doing formal debate practices here. So it's the only opportunity you really have to access or practice any of the types of things we talked about today, at least within the boundaries of this seminar. And it's a good opportunity if you want to have your opinion and pieces posted online for a lot of people to see. So very strongly encouraged would be the answer. Yeah, so what I'm gonna do is I'll give everyone 2-3 minutes to sit and think about any questions they might have about the seminar. And if not, we can close it off here. It's been hopefully valuable in some amount to explain as to why debate is valuable in a lot of ways. Maybe this has convinced some of you to join Debate Club. Maybe it's made the thought of having to join debate a little less daunting. But yeah, that's what we have today. So if I don't see a question in 1 or 2 minutes, you're free to go, and we're just going to close the session at that point. Oh, there's a question in the chat from earlier that I didn't see. There's a few here. So first, as to whether or not there are additional seminars in the future. Yeah, we're going to host future seminars on a variety of other topics. This isn't going to be a necessarily time consistent thing, so we're not going to have them every week, for example. But when those do come out, we'll definitely let anybody who's on the email list, for example, know about it. Sharing info about tournaments. That's something that's kind of hard to do on the Zoom call here. But if you would like to know more about tournaments that you can potentially attend or invitations that give the details of those tournaments, just reach out at the emails, at the second email that I put in the Zoom chat. And it'll be a lot easier for me to reply with actual links that direct you to information about tournaments. And books to learn about debates. There's a lot of books that cover a variety of different topics. I think it's really up to what you're the most interested in. There isn't one book that's best to just learn about debate in general. So I'd encourage, if you want book recommendations, to reach out to the email as well and tell me what kind of book you're looking for, because obviously there's different subject areas books cover. There's also different levels of difficulty that come in reading certain books. And I want to personalize recommendations to whoever wants them so they can maximize the utility they get out of it. Okay. If you're talking about the book I wrote, then that's going to be emailed to everybody on the email list immediately after the session, along with all of the slideshows that we went over here. So if you're on the email list, then it's going to be automatically emailed to you. If you're not, reach out to the second email that I put in the Zoom chat, and I'll make sure to reply with a PDF of it. Last question then. A deadline for the submission? Yeah, I forgot to mention that. So write this down somewhere, make note of it. This shouldn't be a long activity, and I don't want it to be a long activity, because it's supposed to just be a short and enjoyable, hopefully in some amount, insight into what debating looks like. Give you a week to finish it. So on October the 8th, anytime within that time period, feel free to send along an opinion piece that you've put together. Okay. I think that wraps up any questions that anyone has, unless someone has a last minute remark to make. But otherwise, thank you everyone for coming. Hope this provided at least some resemblance of value to people who have came here. Look into the future for any seminars we might host later on, and you're free to go now. So have a good night.